Hi everyone, I want to talk a little bit about evaluation application. You've had a chance now to work through Psalm 46 all the way through the project. You did survey, interpretation, and an evaluation and application. And I want to illustrate how once you've done evaluation on a truth, how that then moves into application, and specifically then how you can use the GPS and the map, those two acronyms that I gave you to help you think through ways to actually move to really specific application. Now, let me say a couple things about that. Again, if you look at the abbreviated method sheet that I have uploaded in our course center, it gives you a specific method for moving from evaluation to application. Again, you start with a specific truth from your interpretation or truths, and then you run it through that grid of trying to figure out what the original application was in the text itself. Were there any limits to it? And then how the rest of the canon, the Old Testament and the New Testament, dealt with that truth. You rewrite that, and then you bring that to make application. So what I've done with Psalm 46, and Psalm 46 is a great psalm that's about security. It's about affirming security against the chaos that's present in the world from both the primordial forces and also just the nations that continue to rebel against God and ultimately serve as a threat to the security of God's people. Again, Psalm 46 is pretty powerful, declaring the tranquility of Zion, of God's holy city as a place of refuge, and then essentially proclaiming out to the chaos of the world that be still and know that I'm God. So Psalm 46 is a marvelous and powerful psalm in all of these things. Now, the takeaway that I ran through an evaluative grid is this particular one: freedom from ultimate responsibility for present and future security. This is actually a hymn of orientation for God's people that girds them so that they can live fully as God's missional people in the world. So how would we actually apply that? This is where GPS and map can help us to make specific application of this, because this is a fairly generic truth, and it's true. And now, let me just say a couple things. In this class, if you can at least get to here, I'll be really happy. So like if you look at my example from Psalm 77, that essentially moves through evaluation and application. I end up with a series of general applications, okay? Those are all well and good, but the problem with general applications is that they give us soundbite theology. They give us interesting things about the Bible, but what we really need to do is we need to take those interesting things, those interesting truths that emerge from our study, and put them into our specific context. So begin to think about a specific context in which you can teach that. And this is where the insider-outsider piece comes into our conversations. Again, insider-outsider, what we want to assume is an insider is somebody who's already following Jesus within your community of faith. And again, as a teacher there, you know certain things, what's going on. So you want to be listening to the text for that person. And traditionally in teaching and preaching, we've done a pretty good job at seminaries to teach people to exegete a text for the audience, i.e. their insiders. But I'm also suggesting in the context that we find ourselves today, if we want to communicate the gospel clearly to persons who aren't yet insiders, we also have to be thinking, how would this sound to an outsider? And I'm not talking about Joe outsider that you'll never meet. I'm talking about the people that are in your life right now. They may be on the peripheral edges of the congregation of your community already, or they're people that you know from your neighborhood. They may be your neighbors. But it's important to listen to the text for people who might show up in your context in a way. Again, it doesn't mean we can read minds, but we want to be cognizant, aware of the kind of thought patterns, worldviews, ideas that people in your specific context have, and then we can listen to the text. Now, in order to implement GPS, we have to first get to a truth, and here we have freedom from ultimate responsibility for present and future security. And GPS has to do with mission, global local mission, persons in community, and then spiritual transformation or holiness. So those three themes: mission, community, holiness. Now, what does this truth have to do? Does it have anything to do with any of those three themes? And I would think the one it really doesn't have anything to do with was going to be holiness, because this isn't so much talking about personal ethics here. This is about talking in a couple ways. It's talking about our mission in a sense, because what does this text calling us to become? In terms of mission, how does this shape my understanding of mission? And one of the things that this really wants to shape is what would it look like in my life? What would it look like for our congregation if we recognized truly that we're secure? Now, this begs, in terms of preaching, what are the things that make us insecure in our present context? You can flesh that out in a sermon context, but in terms of GPS, you want to think about some of those questions. So it's the mission questions. To an insider, what is this text calling me to give my life to? And if you know that you have freedom from ultimate responsibility for your present and future security, this allows people to dream big. And so you can begin to think that way. And so begin to answer those questions about mission in light of this truth. You can also talk about community. What is this text calling us to become? I mean, what would it look like for our community of faith to implement this? Now, outsider. What would it look like for me to give my life to a different kind of mission within a community that lives this kind of truth out? Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit. So you want to take your truth that you get from evaluation, figure out which of the three themes, it might just be one of them. And again, it's possible it could be none of them. It might not be mission, community, or holiness. Remember, GPS is just a working hypothesis that seems to work in most texts, but it doesn't, in most passages, we'll have to have at least one of those themes. A few will have all three, and a couple will have, two of those. So decide which of the GPS pieces helps and run it through the questions that I have laid out for the GPS for both insider and outsider. And then once you've answered those questions, that's then when the map can help you. Because then what we want to talk about is, let's say, how is this text calling me to give my to give my life to a mission? This is inviting us to ask ourselves a question like, what would I do if we knew our future was secure? And I had to put in there, what would I do for God? What would I do for God or Jesus if I knew our future was secure? And I think that's the ultimate takeaway from a mission. And I have it shaped as a question, and we can use that. So let's look at map. So the missional insight would be on map. Psalm 46 is actually calling us to dream big. What mission would we jump out to if we knew that our future was absolutely secure? That's a question for all of us, by the way. So the missional insight would be recognizing that God is calling us to push way outside of our comfort zones because God already has our back. So I might continue to frame this. And again, if you can get to this at some point down the road, this is perfect. But if you want to try to fully implement GPS map, we're adding these things on. If you can at least get to here this semester, you're fine. I give you GPS and map because what I found when I did IBS is I found that the training that I did didn't really help me to get down to the specifics. And I tried to work the rest of my life, both as a pastor and now as a professor, as a way to really generate good, clear takeaways, actionable items that help people to truly experience transformation from Scripture, and not just some kind of intellectual change or saying, wow, that was a good insight, but how do I get that in so we can really live out what we say at Asbury, where head and heart go hand in hand. That's what we want to do. God wants to get into us and transform us as speakers, as persons who read Scriptures, as pastors, as counselors, and the different things that we do, so that we can then coach and inspire and lead others who are embedded in different places, actually in the world, to be life-changing, world-transforming persons and witnesses for the good news of the gospel. And we're only going to do that if we move from taking these kind of platitudinal statements, working them into the deep-rootedness of a person, their mission, their idea of community, what it means to be holy, to be a better person, and then crank that down one more level and make it really specific. So the missional insights is going to be a need to move outside of comfort zone for mission. And again, we can make that even more specific. I'm being generic just because I think we can make that clear. But again, think of your context. What would that look like? What's God calling us to move outside of? And what's going to be the attitude adjustment? Well, you know what it's going to be? I'm going to have to surrender to a lot of things. I'm going to have to surrender to my fears, or surrender my fears. I'm going to have to recognize that it really isn't about me, about my success or my failure. I'm going to trust God, recognizing that God has the future secure. Yahweh is a refuge. So I'm going to trust God. So the attitude adjustment is actually going to push us to a deeper trust. A surrender of fear. And what's going to be my plan of action? Well, what am I going to do to implement this? I might be a simple thing is I might have something on a piece of paper. Everybody take out a piece of paper and write down 3 things that they would love to do for God, or write down the names of 3 people that they've been afraid to witness to, or I'm going to ask them to think about groups that our community of faith ought to be reaching that we're not reaching now. But I'm gonna actually have a call to action here, some specific, something that somebody can do immediately, because this is the key thing. If we can get people in their minds and they'll think, wow, I'm glad that was a good insight. But what we want to do is we want to get the mind, the heart, and the hands all connected. So you have to work on insight, we have to work on the attitude, and we have to actually work on a plan of action. So this is actually how you work through GPS and MAP. I hope this helps a little bit. Go over the abbreviated guide to evaluation application. If you can take this the next step, push yourself, especially if you're teaching or preaching right now. Try to push through and get a hold of this MAP stuff. But again, this is kind of my leading edge right now. I'm very excited about it. Looking forward to see how it works out in the context of this class. But don't worry, again, I don't worry about grades. So you do your very best and you'll be really happy where you end up in class. I'll have feedback on your assignments to you soon that you just turned in, and I look forward to getting the next batch next week. If you have any questions, let me know.